Yo, what's good everyone? We've done a few videos talking about Xilonen's teams, units that she buffs, and why she's worth getting excited about. We haven't looked at her weapon in detail yet though, so we'll look at that, as well as Chiori's weapon, which might surprise you how good it is. Personally, I think this is one of the best weapon banners we've had in terms of 5 stars. As always, if you're not subscribed, punch yourself in the face. Let's talk about Xilonen's weapon first. It's called Peak Patrol Song and it does a few things. Firstly, it's a 5-star sword with a base attack of 542 and it has a secondary stat of 82.7% defense. It gives an extra 8% defense to the holder after a normal or plunge attack hits an opponent, as well as 10% elemental damage. Both can stack twice, so 16% defense, 20% elemental damage. That lasts 6 seconds but can be triggered constantly. The best part about the weapon is it gives 8% elemental damage to the entire party for each 1000 defense the holder has. It can give up to 25.6% elemental damage, and in order to max that out you'll need 3200 defense on the holder. That lasts for 15 seconds. So why is all this so good? Simply put, we don't have many weapons that provide buffs to teammates like this, especially to the entire team. For catalysts, we have some like Thrilling Tales, Hakushin Ring, Wandering Even Star, and Xian Yun's weapon. For claymores, we have Wolf's Gravestone and Makaira Aquamarine. For swords, we have Freedom Swan and Zyphos Moonlight. For bows, we have Elegy for the End. These are the only ones I can think of off the top of my head, but let me know if I'm forgetting about any. Because so many of these weapons are niche or difficult to obtain though, people often just run Favonius weapons when a support character doesn't need a particular weapon. Xilonen's signature weapon is perfect for those scenarios. We'll talk about how other supports can use the weapon in a minute, but first let's talk about its synergy with Xilonen. Xilonen's strength is shredding several elements with little hassle, unlike trying to double swirl with VV, which can be a headache. This makes her suitable to teams with multiple damage dealers that often scale off different stats like attack, defense, elemental mastery, or HP. She's flexible. Her weapon buffing elemental damage instead of one of those stats makes it a universal weapon, which suits Xilonen being a flexible unit. With her scaling off defense, it's a perfect weapon for her, but it's not a bad weapon for other characters either. The only other defense scaling sword users in the game as of right now are Chiori and Albedo, but they can hold this weapon effectively. Their teams will benefit from the extra damage too, often being run with Ito, Navia and others. Bear in mind there is the requirement to do a couple normal attacks, which means it does have a little bit of jank. Putting that aside though, it's not a bad weapon for Bennett either. He doesn't scale off defense, but he does exist to buff the team, so having a weapon like this is nice for him. If you don't currently have a 5-star weapon for him, the base attack for this weapon, despite being low for a 5-star, is still higher than most 4-stars, so his teams benefit there too. My favourite benefit of him holding this weapon is that he can also buff units that don't scale off attack now. For example, in a team with Arlecchino and Yelan, he does a lot for Arlecchino, but Yelan scales off HP so she doesn't benefit from his burst. Giving Bennett this weapon means he can buff her now. Same with teams where you're running with Kenichi and Farina, he buffs Farina now. If you're lucky enough to have a C6 Lynette, running this on her as an on-field driver is a nice buff to teams where you're running with off-field damage dealers. You will lose personal damage on Lynette though, because she'll need 3200 defense, which means you'll be sacrificing main stats on some pieces. Layla's a good holder too. With there not being many HP swords, most people just run Favonius sword on her, but this gives the team way more value. Nalu's another unit that can hold it with a support build not needing anything outside of HP. She probably won't be giving the team the whole 25.6% though, because you'll want to prioritize the HP main stats for her bloom stuff. Cookie's a nice holder too if you want to sacrifice some of her elemental mastery for team damage. In teams where she doesn't need elemental mastery, where maybe you have her as a niche off-field tenacity trigger, this weapon makes that archetype even more viable for her. Karara's a good holder too. In quicken teams where you have a C6 for example, she's going to be giving the team 37.6% elemental damage. Overall, the weapon opens up the door for a lot of interesting team synergies, and we'll only get more as we get more sword users in the future. Now we've talked about Xilonen's weapon, let's move on to my personal favourite part of the video. I imagine a lot of you are going to go for Xilonen's weapon because it's rare that we get 5-star support weapons that buff the entire team. A lot of you are going to get Chiori's weapon on the way there though. I'm going to show you why that's not a bad thing and why personally I want to get Chiori's weapon first. So people overlook this weapon's value. I get it. You skipped Chiori because Arlecchino and Cloran were around the corner, and Chiori looks like Chewbacca diarrhea. You didn't read too much into what her weapon can do outside of Chiori, so you kinda just lump it into the same place you put Chiori. A mid-investment that you're not interested in. It's not a must-pull by any stretch of the imagination, but when you put it up against other 5-star swords, you start to see how it's more versatile than the other options. Before I tell you what it does, let's look at Mist Splitter because I feel the Genshin community's collectively built the illusion that Mist Splitter is untouchable. Mist Splitter is a 5-star sword with a 674 base attack and 44.1% crit damage. It gives 12% elemental damage to the holder, which is unconditional and can apply to normal, skill, burst, or whatever part of a character's kit deals elemental damage. It also gives a stack for each of the following conditions. The holder's normal attack deals elemental damage, this stack lasts 5 seconds, the holder uses their burst, this stack lasts 10 seconds, and the holder's energy is less than 100%. This stack disappears when the energy is full. 1 stack gives 8% elemental damage, 2 stacks gives 16%, 3 stacks gives 28%. Basically, if you have all 3 stacks, you get a total of 40% elemental damage bonus for the holder. This was solid on launch, which made everyone want it, and to be honest, people still want it now. As we know with 5-star weapons though, a higher base attack means a lower secondary stat. While Mist Splitter, in my opinion, is better for attack scalers, Chiori's sword isn't far off for attack scalers, but is much better on units that scale off other stats. Uraku Misugiri, which I'm just going to call Chiori's weapon because if I say that again my mouth will shit itself, has a base attack of 542 and a secondary stat of 88.2% crit damage. Now for an elemental mastery, defense or HP scaler, that's already way more valuable than Mist Splitter. Even for attack scales, the extra crit damage may be more valuable if you're already running them in a team where they get a lot of attack. For example with Bennett, the passive gives 16% normal attack damage and 24% skill damage. If a teammate deals geo damage, bear in mind this doesn't have to be the holder, this buff is increased by 100% for 15 seconds, so 32% normal attack damage and 48% skill damage. Also, the holder gets 20% defense. We have decent geo supports now to be honest, with Zhongli, Xilonen and even Kachina as a Cinder City holder, so it's not that big of a restriction. So who's it good for? Well, it's best in slot for Chiori and Albedo. If you want to build a niche DPS Xilonen, this is going to be her best DPS weapon too. Its value outside of defense units is insane though. Imagine this on Farina. She gets 88% crit damage and 48% skill damage. Clarande, if you don't have her signature weapon, deals both normal attack damage and skill damage regularly. You don't often run her with Geo to be honest, but if you did throw one in there, she's getting 32% normal attack damage and 48% skill damage. And that's on top of the crit damage. C6 Lynette again? Why is she eating so good here? She uses a skill regularly and has her normals converted into Animo at C6, so she benefits too. I do think Mist Splitter is better on her though, and there isn't a restriction of needing Geo in the team, which she does suffer from being an Animo unit. The most interesting unit to benefit from this weapon though is Nalu. Run her with Farina for HP from Hydro Resonance, the damage buff and an extra damage dealer, Kazuha for VV and his elemental damage buff, Xilonen for the same reason as Kazuha as well as healing. Nalu can convert her normals to Hydro with a skill, and it counts as skill damage so she's getting a 48% buff there and not the 32% buff. Plus with a scaling off HP, she prefers the higher crit damage. I'm looking forward to trying that one. As we get more units that don't scale off attack, its value is only going to go up even more. Other 5-star swords include Jade Cutter, but the passive gives 20% HP and attack scaling off the holder's HP, so it's not as universal. Ayato's weapon, in my opinion, is an even more niche version of Mist Splitter. For me, it's between Mist Splitter and Chiori's sword. I say Mist Splitter for attack scalers, Chiori's for everyone else. But Chiori's weapon is better on attack scalers than Mist Splitter is on non-attack scalers. To summarize everything, with it providing a universal team-wide buff regardless of what stats the team scales off, is it safe to say Xilonen's weapon is the best support sword in the game? Given the comparisons we've made with Chiori's sword to others, could it be argued Chiori's sword is the best DPS sword in the game? In my opinion, this weapon banner, regardless of whatever the 4-star weapons may be, is the best sword banner we've had since the game launched, and one of the best banners of any weapon type. As you might know by now, I like to drop guides on day one of a character's release where I look at different team comps for them. My Xilonen guy is going to have more team comps than any of my others so far, so if you're interested in that one, subscribe to the channel and take it easy.